He always believed nothing could shake him. James, the untouchable millionaire, lived on top of the world until in the middle of a gala evening, his gaze froze. There, amid crystal glasses and golden smiles, was Olivia, the woman who had once been his wife, now serving as his maid. The shock pierced his soul like an invisible blade, and from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same. If this scene touched you too, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, where are you hearing this message from? Your support is the force that keeps this space alive, so that stories like this continue to reach you. James Carter had always believed his world was unshakable. From a young age, he had learned to cultivate a steely confidence, a practiced smile, and an impeccable posture that intimidated competitors and seduced investors. For him, vulnerability was a dangerous luxury, something reserved for the naive. So on that sunny Manhattan morning, when he emerged from his penthouse, apartment certain that he controlled every detail of his life, he had no idea that his inner empire was about to shatter in the most unexpected of ways. He was a man of calculated routines, coffee served by his butler at 7, the luxury car waiting with the engine running, meetings scheduled to the exact minute. James was the very picture of control, even in the way he adjusted his shirt cuffs, as if every detail confirmed his position above the world. But life, with its quiet irony, knows how to choose the most delicate moments to deliver its blows. That night, he had an important event, a charity gala dinner at the Harrington Mansion, an elite family known for hosting politicians, artists and tycoons. For James, it was another stage, an opportunity to showcase his influence, to show the market that he was still the same invincible man who had built his fortune from nothing. The mansion gleamed like a palace. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceilings, reflecting soft light onto walls decorated with million-dollar artwork. The scent of fresh flowers mingled with the sophisticated aroma of dishes, served in silence by impeccably dressed staff. Men in suits chatted about mergers and acquisitions. Women flaunted jewels that looked like stars pinned to their laps. And James moved like a king among courtiers, distributing calculated smiles, sharp words, and glances that knew how to gauge opportunities. But then it happened. The moment his champagne glass was filled, James's gaze fell unintentionally on the figure holding the bottle. The hand was delicate, marked by the exertion of someone who no longer lived the comforts of his former self. He glanced up absently and froze. Olivia. For a moment, the air seemed to drain from the room. James's heart raced at a rate he hadn't heard since his youth. This wasn't a stranger. She wasn't just another employee in the Harrington service. This was Olivia, the woman who had been his wife, the only one capable of drawing from him love and fury in equal measure. She stood there before him, wearing a simple maid's uniform, her hair tied in a hasty bun, her gaze lowered, as if trying to hide from the world. James couldn't believe it. How could Olivia, the woman who had once shared his bed, his life, his dreams, now serve glasses like an invisibility among millionaires? The shock was so brutal that he barely reacted. The glass in his hand wobbled, nearly shattering. His mind swirled with unanswered questions. How? Why? What had happened to her since they parted? Where were the brilliance, the dignity, the comfortable life he'd thought he'd left behind with her? He tried to maintain his composure, but his eyes wouldn't look away. Olivia felt the weight of his gaze and slowly raised her eyes. It was a brief but devastating encounter. There was no longer the heat of passion, nor the freshness of youth. There was a silent pain, an invisible wall built by time and unhealed wounds. James felt dizzy. For the first time in years, he wasn't in control. The image of Olivia waiting tables, bending down to clear dishes, avoiding eyes, struck something deep within him, something neither money nor power could protect. The surrounding conversations faded to distant noise. The laughter, the toasts, the soft orchestral music disappeared. All that remained was that cruel shock. The woman he had once loved, so intensely, was now there, reduced to a life he could never have imagined for her. While pretending to participate in the business conversations, James couldn't stop following her with his eyes. Her every gesture seemed to etch scars into his pride. He remembered Olivia's radiant smile, the days when she'd walked beside him at similar parties, wearing dazzling dresses and eyes shining with confidence. Now he saw only a shadow of that woman, swallowed up by the harshness of survival. His chest filled with an unbearable mix of emotions, indignation, guilt, surprise, and an uncontrollable desire to know the truth. After all, how had Olivia, with her intelligence and elegance, fallen into this reality? He knew he couldn't simply pretend he hadn't seen her. But he also didn't have the courage to approach her there, in front of everyone, as if it were just another business matter. The image of James Carter, the unshakable millionaire, needed to be preserved, and yet inside him something was beginning to crumble. Dinner ended and every minute was torment. James felt the weight of gazes that weren't there, as if everyone could guess the hurricane raging in his heart. When the guests began to disperse, he left quickly, his steps too firm to disguise his haste. Inside the car, alone, he finally let out a sigh that seemed to carry years of accumulated pride. He leaned his head back against the leather seat and closed his eyes. But the image of Olivia, in that simple uniform, those tired hands, that restrained gaze, gave him no respite. He thought about everything they had experienced, the nights of fiery passion, the fierce arguments, the plans for the future that had ended in shatters. He remembered the day he had left her, believing he was making the right decision for both of them, convinced that love was not enough to sustain his thirst for power. Now, however, he saw that life had taken unexpected turns and that maybe, just maybe, he had been the one truly defeated. The night was falling, but James couldn't sleep. He paced the rooftop, reliving memories, fighting the pride that still tried to get the better of him. One question kept nagging at him. Should he look for her? Behind all the shock and outrage, there was something deeper, an emptiness that only grew with the passing hours. Olivia wasn't just a reminder of a lost love. She was a cruel mirror of everything he'd tried to bury, his humanity. And though he tried to deny it, James knew he couldn't simply ignore it. The reunion that had shattered him was just the beginning of something bigger, something all the money in the world couldn't control. And in the silence of the night, alone with his memories, he realized that the real downfall wasn't Olivia's. It was his. The gala hall vibrated like a beating heart. With each orchestral sound, the crystals hanging from the chandeliers seemed to dance in golden reflections, illuminating the smiles and social masks that filled the room. Men raised glasses of champagne. Women exhaled rare perfumes that blended notes of jasmine, amber, and expensive roses. It was a scene of ostentation, where nothing seemed to escape control, where every detail was calculated to impress. James was at the center of it all, as always. He chatted with bankers, exchanged jokes with senators, made veiled promises to investors. His gestures were confident, his gaze steady, his voice deep and engaging. On the outside, he was the same man as always, the confident, unshakable millionaire. Inside, however, he still carried the weight of Olivia's vision, etched in his mind from the moment he recognized her hours before. He tried to ignore her, but it was impossible. His eyes instinctively sought her out, as if drawn by an invisible force. And there she was, Olivia, moving between the tables with discreet ease, balancing heavy trays with delicate hands, her shoulders straight despite her humble role. Every time he saw her, James felt a pang in his chest. It was like watching a masterpiece abandoned to time. He remembered Olivia in silk dresses, spontaneous laughter, eyes full of light. Now the simple uniform and the tied bun hid her essence, but they couldn't erase her presence. Even so, there was something devastating in that contrast. The reunion was overwhelming, not only because of the shock of finding her in that position, but because, along with the surprise, memories he'd tried to bury resurfaced. He remembered the first time he'd seen her, so many years before. Olivia had burst into his life like a storm on a sunny day, unexpected, overwhelming, impossible to ignore. Her eyes held a gleam that seemed to see beyond his masks, beyond the arrogance he displayed to the world. With her, James had known a visceral love so intense it frightened him, but he had also known arguments that shook the walls, tears he never learned to console, promises broken by the weight of his ambition. Now, before her again, all those fragments of the past burned like forgotten embers. James wondered, did she feel that way too? Or was he nothing more than a distant mistake to Olivia? A ghost she'd rather erase. When their eyes finally met again, time seemed to stand still. Olivia didn't try to smile. Her gaze was cool, controlled, but it couldn't completely hide the turmoil going on inside. There was surprise, yes. There was pain. And there was also a quiet pride, as if to say, "Don't look at me with pity." James swallowed. His instinct was to call out to her, to break the silence with words, any words. But how? What do you say to a woman who was once everything in your life and now seems so distant? "Sorry? How are you?" Nothing seemed enough, nothing seemed adequate. And Olivia in turn gave him no space. She looked away and continued her work, gliding between the tables as if he were just another guest among many. This gesture, more than any word, cut James deeply. He was used to being noticed, admired, feared, but to Olivia, he seemed nothing. As music filled the air and guests toasted million-dollar deals, James fought the internal storm. His pride tried to scream that he shouldn't care, that Olivia had made her own choices, but his heart, rebellious, insisted on beating faster with her every move. He observed the details, how she maintained her erect posture despite the weight of the trays, how her face, even tired, still held a beauty that no circumstance could steal, how the silence around her seemed more eloquent than any noisy conversation in the room. The memory of fiery nights came rushing back, her rapid breathing against his chest, the whispers in the dark, the warmth of a love that seemed indestructible. At the same time, the echoes of arguments, slamming doors, and angry words that could never be taken back also echoed. All of it was there, compressed into the space of a few seconds, as if the reunion had unlocked a locked box of memories. James couldn't stand the silence any longer. When Olivia passed by him again, serving wine to the guests at his table, he whispered, "Olivia." She froze for a moment. The glass in her hand trembled imperceptibly, but soon regained control. Without looking at him, she replied in a cool, almost professional tone, "Mr. Carter." The formality cut James to the quick. He who had once been my love, my James, was now simply Mr. Carter. His heart pounded as if he'd been punched. "Can we talk?" he ventured, his voice hoarse with contained emotion. Olivia finished filling the glass and, still without looking at him, said, "I am working." And he left, leaving behind a trail of silence heavier than any answer. James closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. This wasn't just a reunion. It was a cruel reminder of everything he'd lost, everything he'd destroyed with his own hands. The world could applaud him, could revere him, but none of that mattered to this woman who now treated him like a stranger. The rest of the night was a torment. He tried to focus on the conversations, the negotiations, the compliments he was receiving, but his mind was fixed on Olivia, on her short, sharp words, on the invisible wall she had erected between them. When the party ended and the guests began to leave, James still searched the hallways for her. He wanted to talk to her again, wanted to break that barrier, wanted to hear anything other than silence, but Olivia seemed to have vanished, like a ghost who had only appeared to remind him of his failings. Outside, under the Manhattan sky lit by artificial lights, James got into his car, but couldn't start the engine right away. He stood there, hands on the steering wheel, his heart heavy. The reunion hadn't just shaken him. It had left him starving for answers, trapped in a past that insisted on returning. He knew he couldn't leave things like this. Not after seeing her, not after feeling the impact that no business deal, no professional victory had ever had on him. Olivia was still a part of him. And for the first time in years, James realized there was something all his money couldn't buy. Her gaze, her truth, her forgiveness. But how can we get closer without destroying ourselves even more? How can we reach someone who now seemed so distant? The questions followed him that night, like shadows clinging to his skin. And James, the man who had always had all the answers, realized he was only beginning to face the hardest one of all. Fate seems to delight in crossing paths that have already parted. For James, the night of their reunion hadn't ended at the gala. It lingered like an unbearable obsession. Days later, when he finally discovered, through discreet investigation, where Olivia worked, he couldn't resist. He needed to see her again, needed to understand how the woman who had once been the center of his life had ended up in this situation. The encounter happened at dusk, As Olivia emerged from the side door of the Harrington mansion, carrying a worn bag over her shoulder, the sky was painted in shades of orange and violet, and the air carried the pre-night freshness. James was there, leaning against his luxury car, waiting like a stalking predator, but with his heart racing like a teenager. She stopped immediately when she saw him. Olivia's face hardened, and the silence between them was sharp. "You've come to follow me now?" Her voice was firm, but her eyes betrayed a slight tremor. James stepped forward. "I need to talk to you. That's all. We have nothing to say." Olivia tried to follow, but he blocked her path, not aggressively, just with the urgency of someone who couldn't wait any longer. "Yes, we do." His eyes were fixed on her, burning with the intensity of someone harboring unanswered questions. "You owe me an explanation." She laughed, but there was no joy in the sound. "Should I?" "No, James. You owe me all the explanations in the world." The words fell between them like sharp blades. He took a deep breath, searching for the control he'd always had in negotiations, but which crumbled in front of Olivia. "What happened to you?" he asked, almost in a whisper. How did it get to this point?" Olivia lifted her chin, her gaze firm. "You don't have that right. You lost it the day you left me alone with the shards of our dreams." The blow was true. James took a step back as if he'd been punched. Images flashed through his mind, the heated arguments, his ambition always coming first, the promises that it would be just another contract, just another trip, until the marriage dissolved into silence and pride. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he murmured hoarsely. "Right for whom?" Olivia's eyes gleamed with suppressed anger. "For you, for your empire, for your ego? It was never for us. You chose me when it was convenient, James. Then you chose the world." He had no answers. There was something deadly true in her words. For years he'd believed it was just the price of success, that Olivia would understand it was all for their future. But looking at her now, so different from the woman who'd walked proudly beside him, he realized he might have built it all alone and truly lost everything in the process. The silence stretched on, heavy, almost unbearable, until Olivia looked away, taking a deep breath, as if trying to contain a whirlwind within her. "Why now, James?" she asked, not looking at him. "Why show up after so long?" He hesitated, and the answer came out more honest than he would have liked. "Because I still miss you." The words hung in the air, hot, dangerous. Olivia closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, there was pain, but also something else, a spark she didn't want to acknowledge. "Don't say that." His voice was low, almost pleading. "Don't complicate what's already broken." James approached slowly, as if afraid of scaring a shy bird. "You can say whatever you want, Olivia. You can hate me, blame me, but you can't deny that you still feel something. I saw it in your eyes." She stared at him, and for a moment the world seemed to fade around her. The distant traffic, the birdsong, even the wind. Everything vanished. There was only the two of them, trapped in an invisible field of attraction and resentment. "Feeling doesn't mean forgiving," Olivia replied firmly, but her voice trembled. "And what I feel is a battlefield inside me. You can't imagine how many times I've dreamed of forgetting you." James raised his hand, almost touching her face, but hesitated at the last second. "And did you succeed?" Silence was the answer. Silence, and her gaze laden with memories, with burning nights, with unwiped tears. He didn't need to hear the words to know there was still fire there, hidden beneath the ashes. Olivia took a step back, as if needing to regain some distance. "I won't make the same mistake again." Firmness returned to her voice. "You taught me not to trust promises, James." He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of those words. When he opened them, there was a rare sincerity in his expression. "Maybe I don't deserve your trust. But, Olivia, I've never stopped loving you." Her heart raced against her will. His name on her lips still burned, still stirred her entire body. She hated this. Hated the fragility she felt before him. "Love?" He laughed bitterly. "Love doesn't survive abandonment. What's left in me isn't love, it's scars." James wanted to reply. He wanted to say that scars are also proof of survival, but his voice faltered. They fell silent, staring at each other, two warriors wounded by ancient battles, but still irresistibly drawn to each other. Deep down, they both knew the truth. The wounds of the past still bled, And perhaps it was precisely this blood that kept them connected, unable to let go completely. When Olivia finally turned to leave, James didn't stop her. He just stood there watching her go, his heart torn between regret and longing. And as night fell upon them, it became clear that this reunion wouldn't be the end. On the contrary, it was merely the beginning of a silent war between resentment and passion, a war neither of them knew they wanted to win. James hadn't been able to sleep for days. His reunion with Olivia had stirred every part of him. Like an old wound rebleeding, it was impossible to focus on business, impossible to pretend nothing had happened. Every meeting felt empty, every victory felt hollow. And amidst this emptiness, only one presence consumed him: Olivia. She in turn did everything to avoid him. She changed shifts when she knew he might show up, refused to talk, and built invisible walls around herself. But the more she fought against it, the more she felt his presence lingering in her thoughts. The past wasn't so easy to bury, and her body seemed to remember it more intensely than her mind cared to admit. The inevitable confrontation occurred on a rainy night. Olivia was hurrying home from work, trying to shield herself from the gusts of wind with a flimsy umbrella, when she found James waiting across the street. He didn't look like a millionaire at that moment. His impeccable suit was soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, but his eyes burned like embers. "You don't understand what you're doing to me, Olivia." His voice cut through the sound of the rain. She stopped, taking a deep breath. Already exhausted from the emotional persecution. "What am I doing to you?" she asked indignantly. "James, you're the one who left me. You're the one who destroyed what we had. Don't you dare blame me." He crossed the street, ignoring the honking cars. He stood in front of her, so close that the warmth of his body seemed to defy the chill of the storm. "I know I messed up. I know I broke promises, but when I look at you..." His voice trailed off for a moment. "When I look at you, I realize nothing has changed." Olivia clutched the umbrella in her hands, as if it were a fragile weapon against his strength. "Yes, you have changed. I have changed. I'm no longer the woman who believed your words." Thunder crashed across the sky as if nature itself accompanied their fury. James took a step closer, and Olivia caught his scent. Mingled with the rain, woody, intense, familiar. Her body reacted before her mind could even control it. "Tell me, Olivia," he murmured, his voice hoarse, almost a whisper. "Tell me you don't feel anything when I'm near." Her heart raced. Anger and desire intertwined dangerously. "I feel anger," she replied, but her ragged breath betrayed her. James lifted his hand and lightly touched her arm. It was like electricity running under her skin. Olivia closed her eyes for a moment, hating herself for allowing that touch, but unable to pull away. "It's not just anger," he insisted. "You know." She opened her eyes and their gazes met in a silent battle. It was a duel of pride, but also a silent confession that the fire still burned. Olivia tried to speak, but the words were lost. In an impulsive gesture, she pushed at his chest. "You destroyed me, James," she cried, her voice cracking. "You left me alone when I needed you most. And now you act like you could just..." He held her hands firmly, interrupting her. "I never forgot you." The silence that followed was thick, charged with tension. Olivia tried to pull her hands back, but his strength was gentle and unwavering. James's gaze burned, and she knew she was about to cross a dangerous line. Suddenly, anger exploded in an unexpected gesture. Olivia pulled him by his tie, pulling him closer. Their lips met violently, not like a kiss of love, but like a battle. It was anger mixed with desire, resentment transformed into fire. The rain fell harder, drenching them, but neither of them seemed to care. James's hands slid around her waist, pulling her close. Olivia, even torn between hatred and passion, couldn't resist. Their bodies remembered each other better than their souls cared to admit. They ran down the street until James pulled her into a nearby nondescript hotel. The silence of the room contrasted with the storm raging outside. Olivia's heart pounded, and her mind screamed for it to stop, but every time she looked into his eyes, she saw the same man who had once been her world. And desire swallowed any attempt at reason. The arguments continued, interspersed with intense kisses. "You broke me," Olivia murmured, even as her hands slid over his body. "And I'll spend my whole life trying to fix it," James replied, his breathing quickening. The night was a whirlwind of pent-up passion. Every touch was an accusation and a forgiveness. Every kiss was anger and desire at the same time. Olivia surrendered herself with her body, while her soul still fought. James possessed her with urgency, but with a reverence that betrayed fear, the fear of losing her again. Hours passed like minutes. The room was filled with moans, silences, intense gazes, and unspoken promises. When Olivia's body finally rested against his chest, still trembling, she closed her eyes, feeling the warmth she knew so well. But the heart did not rest. James stroked her hair silently. There was no victory in the gesture, only need. He knew that night didn't erase the past, only rekindled something that had never died. Olivia, for her part, felt torn. Her body screamed the truth. The desire had never gone away. But her mind remembered the wounds, the broken promises, the abandonment. She pulled away slightly, sitting on the edge of the bed, trying to catch her breath. James watched her silently, his eyes full of questions. "That doesn't change anything," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper to herself. James reached out, gently touching her back. "It changes everything, Olivia." She didn't answer. She just stared out the window, where raindrops still dripped, reflecting the city lights. Deep down, she knew he was right, but admitting it would be giving in. And Olivia wasn't ready to give in. Not yet. The dawn seemed suspended in time. After a night of passion, Olivia woke before James. She sat there on the edge of the bed, watching the man sleeping beside her. He looked so different in that moment, vulnerable, almost innocent, as if the weight of the world didn't reach him when his eyes were closed. But for Olivia, his presence awakened much more than desire. It stirred memories she'd rather keep buried, memories of similar nights when she'd believed in promises of eternity. Now the past whispered to her like a ghost, reminding her of the price she'd paid alone. James woke shortly afterward, groggy, but with a soft smile that nearly broke her defenses. He reached out, gently touching Olivia's arm. "Oh, good morning," he murmured, his voice hoarse. She looked away, getting up quickly. "Don't get used to it." James chuckled softly, but then he noticed the seriousness on her face. "Olivia, why do you always put up such walls?" "Last night." "You can't deny what happened." She stared at him, her eyes more pain than anger. "I don't deny it, James, but I can't pretend it was simple either. You don't know. You never knew." He stood up, approaching slowly. "Then tell me." Olivia crossed her arms, as if seeking a barrier against his pressure. They were silent for a few seconds, until she took a deep breath, as if deciding to walk through a painful door. "You always thought I disappeared because I couldn't handle your ambition anymore." His voice was firm but thick with emotion. "But that wasn't it. I gave up the life we had because someone needed me." James frowned in confusion. "Someone?" Olivia hesitated, her eyes welling up. "My sister, James." He blinked, trying to take it in. "Your sister?" She nodded. "When we broke up, you were so focused on your business that you didn't even notice. She was sick, a cruel, devastating illness, and I couldn't leave her alone." James felt the ground slip away from under his feet. "Why didn't you tell me?" Olivia laughed bitterly, a laugh that sounded more like a sob. "Because I knew what your answer would be. You would have told me to hire the best doctors, the best hospitals. You would have thrown money at the problem, as if that would solve everything. But it wasn't just money she needed. She needed someone. Care, presence, love." He opened his mouth to respond, but couldn't. The image of Olivia, leaving everything behind, dedicating every minute of her life to her sick sister, hit him like a direct blow. "I left behind dresses, trips, parties. I left behind comfort." Olivia's voice trembled. "I spent entire nights awake beside her, holding her hand, praying she'd survive until dawn. I worked jobs you'd never imagine. James, I cleaned houses, cooked, waited tables, all to pay for medicine and keep a roof over our heads. The tears were now falling uncontrollably, and I never asked for your help, never, because I knew, deep down, you wouldn't understand." James felt his heart shatter. Her every word was like a mirror, reflecting not only her past, but also his own flaws. He had always believed Olivia had left him out of pride, unable to bear life with a man obsessed with power. He had never imagined that, in truth, she had been stronger than he had ever been, carrying alone a burden that would have crushed anyone. Olivia, her voice trailed off. I didn't know. She stared at him steadily, her eyes red with emotion. Of course you didn't know. You never noticed anything but yourself. Silence fell between them like a heavy blanket. James wanted to move closer, wanted to hug her, but he hesitated. He felt that any gesture would seem small compared to the magnitude of her sacrifice. "And your sister?" he asked carefully. Olivia took a deep breath, wiping away her tears. "She's been gone for 2 years." The words cut through the air like knives. James closed his eyes, feeling the weight of that revelation. He thought of all the years Olivia had disappeared from the radar, of all the moments he could have been there for her but hadn't. "I'm so sorry," he murmured sincerely. "You don't have to feel sorry," Olivia replied bitterly. "I learned to deal with it on my own." She walked away, grabbing her bag from the chair. "And now you know. This is why I left the comfortable life. It was my choice. And despite everything, I would do it again." James quickly approached, grabbing her arm but gently. "Olivia, you didn't have to carry this alone. I should have been there." "You should have, but you weren't." She stared at him closely, her eyes flashing. "That's the truth, James. You were too busy conquering the world while I was losing mine." The words echoed in his mind like a judgment impossible to ignore. James felt shame burn his skin, but along with it, an unexpected admiration. Olivia wasn't the fragile woman he remembered. She was much stronger, more resilient, more human than he had ever been. She pulled her arm away from his touch. "Don't try to comfort me now. That's not what I need." James stood still, watching her. His heart pounded, and something inside him broke, then mended. For the first time, he realized that perhaps Olivia was everything he'd always wanted. Not just a life partner, but someone capable of choosing love over any wealth. "Olivia?" He tried again, but his voice failed. She opened the door, pausing for a moment before stepping out. She turned to him, her face streaked with tears and dignity. "Now you know, James, and knowing hurts more than any silence, doesn't it?" And she left, leaving him alone in the room. With the crushing weight of the revelation, James fell onto the bed, his face in his hands. For the first time in years, he felt small, helpless, human, and deep down, he knew nothing would ever be the same after that truth. Because of all the riches he had lost and gained, the only one that really mattered was that woman he had just left and who he might never be, able to win back. For James Carter, life had always been a succession of victories. From a young age, he learned to turn risks into opportunities, defeats into stepping stones. He was the man who never failed, who always found a way to stay on top. The world applauded him, investors revered him, competitors feared him. But on that grey morning, sitting at the head of a silent conference room, James realized that the wall he had built around himself was about to crumble. Before him, a stack of documents. Numbers that didn't make sense, accounts that didn't add up, contracts signed in his absence. And on the other side of the table, a void where Edward Lang, his trusted partner for over 10 years, should have been. Edward had disappeared, along with millions of dollars of the company's money. James was breathing heavily, his fingers drumming on the tabletop. Betrayal hurt more than the numbers. Edward was more than a business partner. He was a friend, someone he trusted completely, someone he'd introduced to his home, someone he'd toasted alongside Olivia years ago. The phone rang nonstop. Banks demanded answers, investors threatened lawsuits, the press sniffed out scandal. Within hours, James's name, synonymous with power, was splashed across newspapers, now associated with the word he hated most, failure. He tried to act with his usual calm. He called lawyers, called emergency meetings, and ordered his team to sort everything out. But for the first time, he felt the futility of his orders. The numbers didn't lie. Edward's escape had left a massive hole. A significant portion of his fortune had evaporated. The Carter empire was collapsing. At night, alone in his penthouse, James paced back and forth. The silence of the apartment seemed to mock him. The white walls reflected his anguish. The expensive paintings seemed to remind him of wealth slipping through his fingers. He opened a bottle of whiskey, but not even the alcohol could numb the growing emptiness. With every sip, he remembered Olivia. The words she'd spoken days before. I lost my world while you conquered yours. Now he was the one losing everything. What had once seemed distant and incomprehensible, the feeling of helplessness, the weight of vulnerability, was now his reality. For the first time, James knew the bitter taste of helplessness. The nights became long and sleepless. With each new newspaper, each story, his image was tarnished. Occasional friends disappeared, investors became enemies, and even employees who once bowed down to him now regarded him with suspicion. He remembered Olivia's gaze, full of dignity even amidst the pain. How had she managed to endure so much without breaking down? How had she found the strength to keep going when everything seemed lost? James, accustomed to having the world at his feet, could now barely hold his own reflection in the mirror. It was in this fragility that he decided to seek out Olivia. Not out of pity, he knew she wouldn't accept that, but because he needed to understand how someone could survive when everything fell apart. That night, under the light rain that seemed to accompany every recent step of his life, James parked in front of the small house where he knew Olivia lived. It was no longer a mansion. It was a simple building, with peeling walls, but with a warm light leaking through the window. He stood there inside the car, staring out as if facing a universe he had never understood. After a few minutes, he went downstairs. He knocked on the door, and the sound echoed in his chest like a war drum. Olivia answered with a surprised, but not entirely shocked expression. "James?" He tried to smile, but his tired face betrayed his slump. "I needed to see you." She hesitated, but made room for him to enter. The interior of the house was simple, but there was something there that James hadn't found in his luxurious penthouse. Warmth. A worn sofa, a folded blanket, stacked books. It was a home, not an empty palace. "What happened?" Olivia asked, crossing her arms suspiciously. James took a deep breath, fighting his pride. "I was betrayed. My partner took part of my fortune, ruined contracts, destroyed my reputation." Olivia watched him silently. There was something between compassion and irony in her eyes. "So you know now?" "Know what?" "What it's like to lose everything." She leaned closer, but her voice held no cruelty, only firmness. "What it's like to wake up and realize the ground has disappeared from under your feet." James dropped his gaze, unable to hold hers. For the first time, he had no answers, no plans, no control. Only the crushing weight of vulnerability. "I don't know what to do, Olivia." His voice cracked, something unthinkable to him. "Everything I've built is falling apart." She sighed, sitting down on the couch. "Then sit down and learn, because life isn't about unbreakable empires. James, it's about falls, and what you do after them." He sat beside her, his shoulders hunched, like a man much older than he actually was. Silence fell, but this time it wasn't empty. It was charged with meaning. Olivia watched him discreetly. There was something almost strange about seeing James like this, fragile, stripped of his arrogance. For the first time, she saw him as human, not the unattainable titan she'd always believed him to be. James looked up, and in them was a silent plea. "How did you do it, Olivia? How did you endure it all?" She smiled sadly. "I had no choice. When life knocks you down, you either learn to get back up or you stay down." He nodded, letting out a heavy sigh. Inside him, something was breaking, but at the same time, something new was being born. A humility he'd never experienced before, a need to learn from the only person who seemed to know what it meant to survive pain. Olivia stood, walking to the window. The rain beat against the glass, and she spoke without looking at him. "Maybe now you understand why I never asked for your help, because deep down I knew you didn't know the value of falling." James sat there, absorbing every word. It was painful to admit, but she was right. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the untouchable millionaire. He was just a lost man, trying to learn to breathe amidst the rubble. And as he watched Olivia stand there, her back to him, he felt that maybe that was exactly what would save him. James's downfall had stripped away all his masks. The man once seen as a business titan now walked the streets of Manhattan with uncertain steps, as if the ground might fall apart at any moment. His phones no longer rang with invitations, but with demands. The doors that once swung open before him now closed coldly, as if they had never belonged to the same world. Olivia knew this. She didn't need the newspapers to feel the weight of the silence that enveloped James. Somehow she sensed he was sinking, and something inside her, maybe a remnant of love, maybe just compassion, couldn't ignore it. It was on a cool autumn afternoon that she decided to look for him. She found him in his apartment, but not the one from his heyday. James had sold his luxurious penthouse to pay off urgent debts and now lived in a much smaller space, still elegant but devoid of ostentation. When Olivia entered, she realized it wasn't just the apartment that seemed smaller. It was him. James sat at the table, surrounded by papers, his head in his hands. His impeccable suit had been replaced by a wrinkled shirt. The dark circles under his eyes betrayed sleepless nights, and the look was that of a man who had discovered he was mortal. "You look tired," Olivia said softly, announcing her presence. He looked up, surprised. "Olivia, I didn't expect to see you here." She stepped forward, maintaining her calm demeanor. "I didn't expect it either, but I came." For a few seconds she just stared at him. The man who had been at the top now looked broken, and it touched something deep within her. He had hurt her before, left her alone before, but there before her wasn't the arrogant James, just a man in need. James tried to smile. "Have you come to see the spectacle of my downfall up close?" Olivia shook her head. "No, James, I came to remind you that ruin is not the end." He laughed, but there was bitterness in the sound. "Easy to say. You can't imagine what it's like to lose everything." She stared at him firmly, and the answer came sharply. "No, I lived through this before you, remember? I lost my sister. I lost my home, I lost my place in the world. I worked in silence without anyone reaching out to me. If anyone knows what it's like to start over from scratch, it's me." James looked down, embarrassed. "You're right. And maybe that's why you're here. Because I don't know how to get up this time." Olivia walked over and placed a hand on the table close to his. She didn't touch him yet, but her presence was enough to make him look up. "Then learn," she said firmly. "The money can be recovered. The reputation can be rebuilt. But what will define who you are is how you handle this fall." James watched her silently. Her words weren't just comfort, they were truth. A truth that hurt but also enlightened. "Do you think I'm still capable?" he asked, his voice low, almost childish. Olivia took a deep breath, and this time there was no irony, just sincerity. "I know it is, but you need to understand that strength isn't in never falling. It's in not being ashamed to get up." Silence stretched. The closeness between them held something new, an intimate space where pain and tenderness met. James reached out slowly, touching her hand on the table. It was a shy gesture, but full of meaning. "Thank you for being here, Olivia," he murmured. "I don't deserve it." She didn't pull her hand away. "Maybe you don't deserve it, but it's not about deserving it. It's about humanity." That night, Olivia made coffee in the apartment's small kitchen. As the strong aroma wafted, James watched her silently. It was strange. The woman he had lost was there, simply caring for him in a way no one else dared. "You were always stronger than me," he said with a melancholy smile. Olivia looked at him over her cup. "It's not force, James, it's choice. I chose not to give up, even when all seemed lost. Now it's your turn to choose." They talked for hours. Olivia spoke of dignity, of how she found value not in the things she had, but in the people she loved. James listened like a student before a teacher, absorbing every word, every gesture. And when dawn arrived, there were no definitive answers, but there was something new, a ray of hope. James walked Olivia to the door. Before she left, he held her hand firmly. "You're the only person who still believes in me." Olivia smiled, a small but sincere smile. "Maybe because I saw the real you behind all that pride." He pulled her gently closer, and for a moment the world seemed silent. Desire throbbed, but this time it wasn't just physical. It was something deeper, a need for connection, for redemption. Olivia, however, took a step back before their lips met. "Not yet, James," she said softly. "First, prove to yourself that you can be more than the man who lost an empire." And he left, leaving him alone again. But unlike other nights, James didn't just feel emptiness. He felt determination. Olivia had planted a seed, and for the first time since the fall, he believed there might still be a future. Manhattan's winter crept in, blanketing the city with a shroud of ice and silence. The dry trees lining the avenues looked like twisted bones against the grey sky, and the bright storefronts contrasted with the emptiness James carried within. But that morning there was something different, a spark. It had all started weeks before, during long conversations with Olivia. She would show up at his apartment almost always at dusk, bringing hot coffee, sharp words, and a presence that had the power to reorder chaos. She offered no pity, no magical solutions. She offered only the quiet strength of someone who had walked through the valley of pain and emerged stronger. One of those nights, sitting at the table covered in papers, James blurted out, "I can't go back to what it was. The empire is over. Maybe it's too late to rebuild anything." Olivia looked at him for a few moments seriously, before answering, "Maybe you don't need an empire, James. Maybe you just need a fresh start." He laughed humorlessly. "And what would I do? Go back to the market as if nothing had happened? No investor trusts me anymore." She leaned in, her eyes shining with a different flame. "Then don't depend on them. Create something of your own, something small but true." James was silent, absorbing those words. Something of ours. It was so simple and yet so revolutionary. That's how the idea was born. Not a far-fetched project, not a giant company, but something that embodied the essence of both. A small cafe in the heart of the city, with a space for art, music, and gatherings. Olivia had always had a talent for creating welcoming environments, for transforming ordinary places into havens for the soul. James, in turn, had the strategic vision, discipline, and knowledge to transform dreams into solid structures. "A coffee?" he repeated, still in disbelief. Days later, when they went to visit an old space for rent, "Not just a cafe," Olivia corrected, smiling. "A place where people can breathe, reconnect. Live music, exhibitions by local artists, a slice of humanity amidst the hustle and bustle." James surveyed the empty space. The walls were peeling, the floor creaked, and the ceiling seemed to be crying out for help. But for the first time in months, he didn't see ruins. He saw possibilities. "It's going to be a lot of work," he muttered. "Work never scared me," Olivia replied, crossing her arms, and he believed her. The following days were intense. Olivia spent hours choosing colors, used furniture, and simple fabrics that transformed the space into a warm space. James handled negotiations, contracts, and suppliers. Together, they were a curious machine. She created, he structured. She dreamed, he made it happen. Between brushstrokes of paint on walls and spreadsheets of expenses, the two began to rediscover the partnership that had once existed between them. It was no longer the same relationship as before, marked by luxury and extravagant parties. It was simpler, more real, and precisely because of that, more valuable. There were tense moments, of course, heated arguments over budget, menu choices, opening hours. Olivia laughed at James's rigidity. He sighed at her boldness. But deep down, each argument ended with a knowing look, a silent reminder that they were in this together. One night, as they were painting the last shelves, Olivia stopped and looked at him. James had splatters of blue paint on his face, and for the first time in a long time, he looked light. He wasn't the powerful executive, but the man she'd met years ago with eyes full of life. "You've changed," she said softly. He raised his eyebrows. "For the worse?" She smiled. "For human." James set aside his brush and looked back at her, his heart racing. "Maybe I'm just remembering who I always was," and had forgotten. The silence that followed was heavy, dense. Olivia looked away but couldn't help the smile that appeared on her lips. The cafe's opening took place on a chilly Saturday afternoon. There were no major investors, no camera flashes, just friends, neighbors, local artists, and curious passers-by. The aroma of fresh coffee mingled with the soft sound of a guitar, played by a young musician. The walls displayed paintings of emerging talent, and the tables were filled with lively conversation. James looked around in disbelief. "We did it." Olivia beside him held a cup. "We're still in the early stages, but yes, we did it." He turned to her, and his gaze lingered longer than it should have. There wasn't just pride there. There was a deep recognition that together they were stronger than they had ever been apart. Throughout the evening, James dedicated himself to welcoming clients, chatting and organizing details. Olivia maintained the atmosphere, encouraged artists, and smiled at everyone who entered. They functioned as two sides of the same soul. At the end of the opening, as the lights dimmed and silence filled the room, Olivia leaned against the counter, exhausted but radiant. James approached, still holding a half-empty bottle of wine. "You know what surprises me most?" He said. "What?" "I thought I needed the whole world to feel alive, but this was all it took." He gestured to the small cafe around them. It was just the two of us. Olivia was silent, swallowing the emotion rising in her throat. He took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "Olivia, I don't know what the future holds, but I know none of this would make sense without you." Her heart raced, but her mind still resisted. There was fear, there were wounds, yet there was also something undeniable. They were rebuilding not just a business, but something larger, invisible, that pulsed between them. Olivia looked away, smiling slightly. "Let's just keep the cafe open for now. Then we'll see." James nodded, but his eyes said more than words. And that night, as they turned off the last light in the cafe, they both knew they were just at the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter in which the past still echoed, but where the present offered something rare, a new chance. The cafe became more than a business. It became a symbol of resilience, of new beginnings. Each morning, as the aroma of fresh coffee wafted through the room and soft tea, light streamed through the windows, James and Olivia were reminded that they were building something that depended not on fortune or status, but on hard work and dedication. It wasn't easy. There were days when clients were few, when bills seemed to outweigh enthusiasm. There were suppliers who delayed deliveries, equipment that broke at the wrong time, and nights when both of them left exhausted, their hands stained with coffee and paint. But there were also small miracles, the smile of a grateful client, the music that filled the space with life, the knowing glances exchanged amidst the rush. It was in these details that love, previously wounded, began to be reborn. James, accustomed to leading large teams, now bussed tables and served customers. At first there was a visible discomfort, as if he were out of place, but Olivia watched him with pride, seeing him learn humility in every gesture. He who had once believed that power was synonymous with greatness, now discovered greatness in service. "I never thought I'd see you washing cups," Olivia commented one morning when she found him behind the counter. "Apron on, sleeves rolled up." He smiled, tired but sincere. "And I never thought it would do me so much good." Olivia laughed, and there was something different about that laugh. It was no longer ironic or hurt. It was light, almost affectionate. There were also times when James was by her side, supporting her when the weight seemed too much. One afternoon, after receiving unfair criticism from a demanding customer, Olivia locked herself in the stockroom, breathing deeply to keep from collapsing. James found her there, sitting among boxes, her eyes brimming with tears. "Hey!" He knelt beside her unhurriedly. "Don't let this get you down. You created all of this from scratch. This place has your soul." Olivia sighed, letting a tear escape. "Sometimes I feel like it's not enough." James took her hand. "Olivia, you are enough. You always have been." That phrase, spoken softly, broke through the barriers she still maintained. They weren't words of seduction. They weren't empty promises. They were sincere. And in that moment, Olivia realized that James was no longer the same man who had left her years before. He had changed. The intimacy between them grew slowly. It wasn't an instantaneous return to love, but a process, a patient rebirth. There were lingering glances, discreet touches as they passed each other at the counter, long conversations after closing the cafe. One evening, sitting on the small terrace out, back with a bottle of cheap wine and the distant sound of the city, James said, "Do you know what the biggest difference is between what we were and what we are now?" Olivia looked at him curiously. "Which one?" "Before I loved you as someone who possesses. Now I love you as someone who learns." Silence fell for a few seconds, heavy with emotion. Olivia looked away but couldn't hide the glint in her eyes. "You talk nicely when you want to," he tried to joke, but his voice cracked slightly. James smiled. "It's not pretty. It's real." The days turned into weeks and the challenges continued. But together they grew stronger. When James became irritated by a supplier's slowness, Olivia reminded him to take a deep breath. When Olivia was consumed by self-doubt, James reminded her of her strength. It was a delicate dance of mutual support, a balance built on respect. The city began to notice. Long-time customers commented on the energy between the two. How the cafe felt more than a business. It felt like a home. Musicians who performed there spoke of the place's magical atmosphere, and artists were grateful for the space. One night after an exhibition closed, Olivia was left alone arranging the paintings. James entered the quiet room and found her standing before a colorful canvas. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How I never imagined we'd be here," he replied, smiling slightly. "After everything." Together again. James approached slowly and stopped behind her. "I never imagined it either, but maybe we needed all those falls to get here." Olivia turned to face him, and his eyes reflected something beyond passion. There was tenderness, there was respect. There was love. He lifted his hand and touched her face, and this time she didn't flinch. The kiss that followed wasn't as passionate as before, but gentle, patient, like someone finding rest after a long walk. That kiss marked the beginning of a new phase. From then on, the two began to live not just as business partners, but as lifelong companions. There were no grandiose promises, no illusions. There was only the daily choice to be together, to support each other, to walk side by side. One morning, as he opened the cafe, James handed Olivia a small box. She opened it, surprised, and found inside a simple necklace with a tree-shaped pendant. "What does it mean?" she asked, touching the pendant. "Roots," James replied, "to remind us that what we're building now won't be blown away." Olivia smiled excitedly. "You're getting good at this." "In what?" "In true love." The cafe thrived, not in exorbitant wealth, but in meaning. And with each achievement, James and Olivia rediscovered themselves as a couple. He more humble and present, she more open and confident. Their love was no longer an uncontrolled flame, but a steady, strong ember that warmed without burning. There were still ghosts from the past, of course. There were painful memories, scars that wouldn't fade. But now they knew how to face them together. And one of those nights, as they closed the cafe and turned out the lights, Olivia took James's hand and said, "I never thought I could trust you again." He looked at her, his emotions suppressed. "What now?" She squeezed his hand. "Now I know I don't have to trust the man you were. Only the man you've become." James's heart sank, and he kissed her right there, under the dim lights of their cafe. But as they embraced, they both knew there was still a bigger step, ahead, a decision, that could seal the future they were rebuilding. And fate, silent, seemed to just wait for the right moment to test them one last time. Spring arrived like a whisper of hope in Manhattan. After months of cold, the streets were once again colored by shy flowers blooming in the parks, and the air carried a light, almost childlike freshness. For James and Olivia, it wasn't just the city being reborn, it was themselves. The cafe was thriving. It wasn't an empire, but a collective home, a space where strangers became friends and artists found a stage. The place reflected something money could never buy: authenticity. And it was there, among wooden tables and soft songs, that James and Olivia decided to take the next step. There were no newspaper announcements, no lavish invitations, no endless guest lists, no preoccupation with appearances. They chose something different, an intimate ceremony, with only the people who truly mattered to them. They wouldn't celebrate numbers, but the arduous journey that had brought them to this moment. On the morning of the wedding, Olivia woke early. The sun streamed through the cracks in the window of her small house, and she sat in silence for a few minutes, feeling her heart pound. It wasn't nerves. It was peace. She thought about everything she'd experienced, the tears, the sacrifices, the nights she'd believed she'd never love James again. And now here she was, about to marry the same man again, but not with the same heart. She wore a simple dress, made of light fabric, white as the first days of spring. Her hair was tied up delicately, a few loose strands touching her face. She wore no expensive jewelry, just the necklace with the tree pendant James had given her months before. James, meanwhile, stood in a small dining room of the cafe, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. Unlike the man from years ago, he wasn't wearing a tailored suit imported from Italy. He wore something understated, elegant yet modest. The reflection in the mirror showed him not the arrogant tycoon he once was, but a grateful man. When the time came, guests began to gather in the cafe, transformed into a magical space. Wildflowers decorated the tables, candles illuminated the room with soft light, and in the background, a string quartet played a sweet, simple melody. Loyal customers, friends, artists who had found refuge there, everyone smiled as if witnessing a miracle. James stood by the makeshift altar, a flower arch lovingly erected by Olivia and a few friends. His heart skipped a beat when he saw her enter. Olivia was walking down the aisle between the tables, her flowing dress following her steps, a shy smile lighting up her face. He couldn't hold back the tears. They weren't tears of regret, but of gratitude. Every step she took was proof that life had given her a second chance. When Olivia reached him, she held his hand firmly. And it was in that touch that they both knew. They were no longer in the past. They were in the now, ready for whatever was to come. The celebrant, a close friend of Olivia's family, began the ceremony. The words were simple yet profound. They spoke of choices, forgiveness, and new beginnings. They spoke of love not as a fleeting feeling, but as a daily decision. Today we are not celebrating wealth or external achievements, said the celebrant. We are celebrating the courage of two hearts that decided to find each other again. Despite the scars, James shook Olivia's hand, moved, and then it was time for the vows. He was the first to speak. Olivia, he began, his voice breaking. I was once an arrogant man, blind to what truly mattered. I traded promises for contracts and let love slip away from me. But you, even when everything fell apart, even when I didn't deserve it, you showed me dignity, courage, and resilience. Today, before everyone, I promise not only to love you, but to respect you. I promise to be your partner, not your owner. I promise to walk beside you and never ahead of you again. Olivia's tears flowed freely. She took a deep breath before answering. James, there was a time when I thought I would never trust you again. The wounds were too deep, the pain unbearable. But time and life have shown me that even scars can blossom. Today, when I look at you, I don't see the man who hurt me. I see the man who learned, who fell and got back up, who chose to start over. I promise to be by your side, not for luxury, not for security, but for who we are when we are together, true. The silence in the cafe was absolute. Many of those present were crying, touched by the raw sincerity of those words. And then, amid applause and tears, James and Olivia sealed their new marriage with a soft, tender kiss. There were no fireworks, no spectacle, just a kiss that carried all the strength of a love that had survived time, pride and adversity. The celebration that followed was simple but joyful. Live music filled the space. Friends toasted with cheap wine, and children ran between tables laughing. James and Olivia danced together for the first time in years, and the dance was neither rehearsed nor perfect. It was awkward, genuine, full of laughter and knowing glances. At one point, James pulled her close and whispered, I will never lose you again. Olivia smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. We don't need eternal promises, James. We just need to choose each other, every day. And that's exactly what they did. Marriage wasn't an end, but a beginning. There was no guarantee they would never face new hardships, but there was the certainty they would be together. Their love was no longer the fiery fire of youth, but the steady, warm ember that sustains them through the harshest winter. That night, when they returned home, Olivia looked at James and said, Strange to think that we had to lose everything to gain what really matters. He pulled her close, smiling. Maybe that's how life teaches us. And as they embraced under the starry sky, they knew that they were finally at peace. In the end, James and Olivia discovered that true luxury was never found in gold or mansions, but in the courage to start over. Because love truly is choosing the other, even when the scars still hurt. And perhaps deep down, that's the question that remains. How many times are we willing to start over for love? If this story touched you, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, where are you hearing this message from? Your support is what allows us to continue bringing you stories that speak directly to the heart.